Before you try to influence a single soul on this planet, you need to understand one uncomfortable truth. People don't follow words, they follow outcomes. They follow proof, they follow results. They follow the person who is already moving with conviction while everyone else is stuck negotiating with their excuses. Most people want influence without discipline. They want respect without consistency. They want admiration without sacrifice. They want to be seen as leaders while living like followers of their own impulses. And that's why their lives never move. Real leadership never begins with managing others. It begins with managing yourself when no one is watching. It begins in the dark rooms, the lonely mornings, the private battles, the decisions you make with zero applause. People follow you only after you've proven you don't need them to. That is the law. This audiobook is not about leadership techniques. It's about the internal restructuring required before anyone has a reason to trust you. 7 chapters, 7 internal shifts. 7 uncomfortable truths that will force you to confront how you've been living, thinking, acting, and hiding from your potential. If you're expecting comfort, close the book. If you're ready to confront yourself, begin. Chapter 1. Lead yourself before you lead anyone. The first rule of leadership is simple, but most people never live it. If you can't lead yourself, you have no business trying to lead anyone else. The world doesn't care about your intentions, your dreams, or the stories you tell about what you want to achieve. It cares about what you consistently execute. Everything else is noise. People talk about leadership as if it begins the moment others start listening to you. They imagine the speeches, the influence, the authority, the admiration. They picture a version of themselves at the top but ignore the foundation underneath it. That foundation is self-governance. Without it, you're just an untrained voice asking for attention you haven't earned. The truth is, leadership starts in moments no one sees. It starts in the decisions you make when you're tired, frustrated, overwhelmed, or tempted to take the easy way out. It starts with your relationship with discipline, not with your ability to motivate others. Before anyone ever follows you, they're watching you silently, carefully, subconsciously. They're not evaluating your intelligence, they're evaluating your alignment. Every person you admire has one thing in common: their actions match their words. Their habits reflect their values. They live in a way that makes their advice credible. You trust them because they don't just talk, they embody. Now flip that on yourself. If your own actions, habits, and choices were quietly observed for a month, what story would they tell? Would they show a person who can steer their own life, or someone being tossed around by impulses and moods? Most people lead based on how they feel, not based on what they've committed to, and that's exactly why they don't move. Here's the uncomfortable reality. If you can't give yourself instructions and follow them, your entire life will be ruled by chaos. You'll make promises you never keep. You'll set goals you never meet. You'll start projects you never finish. You'll become the type of person who inspires no one, not even yourself. Self-leadership means understanding that your impulses are not qualified to run your life. Your excuses are not trustworthy advisors. Your comfort zone is not your friend. If you want to lead yourself, you have to treat your weaker self like an unreliable employee and your stronger self like the uncompromising boss. People don't follow you because you have good ideas. They follow you because you have visible results. They follow the person who acts, not the person who announces. They follow the person whose behavior is consistent, not the one who only behaves when life feels easy. This is why so many people struggle with influence. They want others to listen, but they don't listen to themselves. They want others to respect them, but they repeatedly disrespect their own potential. They want others to trust them, but they can't trust their own consistency. Leading yourself starts with brutal honesty, the kind most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You need to confront your flaws head-on, not excuse them, not justify them, not hide them behind busyness or distractions. You need to acknowledge them with clarity and take responsibility for changing them. A leader doesn't escape the truth. A leader confronts it. And this honesty isn't meant to crush you. It's meant to free you. The moment you admit your weaknesses, you take away their power. The moment you identify the patterns that hurt you, you can break them. The moment you stop lying to yourself, your transformation begins. But honesty alone is not enough. You need structure, you need standards, and you need routines that hold you in place when motivation disappears. Motivation is a visitor. Discipline is a lifestyle. If you depend on motivation, you'll quit every time life stops feeling comfortable. But if you depend on discipline, you'll progress regardless of mood. Self-leadership is the art of doing what is required, not what is convenient. It's waking up when you said you would, even if you slept horribly. It's showing up for your responsibilities even when your emotions scream for rest. It's saying no to distractions because you've already said yes to a higher priority. Every day you lead yourself, you strengthen your credibility to yourself first and then to the world. That's why people follow leaders who are consistent. Consistency builds trust. Trust builds influence. There is nothing inspiring about someone who constantly breaks commitments. There is nothing admirable about someone who avoids hard work. There is nothing influential about someone who can't manage their own impulses. When you lead yourself well, people feel it. They sense stability in you. They sense direction. They sense seriousness. They sense a person who is not controlled by circumstances, emotions, or excuses. And that's precisely why leadership begins privately. It begins in your morning routines, in the way you handle failure, in the way you handle stress, in the way you handle promises you've made to yourself. It begins in the choices no one will ever applaud you for. If you want people to follow you, give them a reason, not through speeches, not through inspiration, not through plans, but through the way you live. Make your life the evidence. Make your habits the message. Make your actions the teaching. Make your consistency the magnet. Influence is not requested, it's earned. Leadership is not granted, it's demonstrated. Respect is not demanded, it's created through discipline, honesty, and alignment. Before you try to guide anyone else, become someone worth following. Before you try to lead others out of confusion, lead yourself out of yours. Before you ask people to trust you, build a life that deserves trust. Your journey as a leader begins the moment you finally decide to stop negotiating with your weakness and begin negotiating with your potential. Lead yourself first, and the world will follow naturally. Chapter 2. Discipline is your first form of leadership. Discipline is not glamorous. It's not exciting. It's not something you post on social media for likes or applause. It's repetitive, demanding, unromantic, and often uncomfortable. And that's exactly why it's the first, most essential form of leadership. Anyone can talk about goals. Anyone can imagine a better life. Anyone can dream about success. But discipline is what separates dreamers from performers. If you cannot discipline yourself, you will never direct your life. You will live in reaction instead of creation. You will drift instead of advance. Your days will be controlled by your impulses instead of your intentions. And eventually, you will become the type of person who constantly thinks about change but rarely produces it. Most people don't fail because they lack talent or intelligence. They fail because they lack consistency. They rely on motivation, which is emotional, unstable, and short-lived, instead of structure, which is steady, clear, and reliable. Motivation makes you feel good. Discipline makes you better. The real reason people struggle to build discipline is because it forces them to confront the part of themselves they've spent years protecting: their comfort. Comfort feels safe. It feels familiar. It feels easy. But comfort is also the silent killer of potential. If you always choose what feels good, you will never gain what feels meaningful. Every time you delay a task because you're tired, every time you skip a commitment because you're not in the mood, every time you promise yourself something and fail to follow through, you are weakening your own authority. You're teaching your mind that your words mean nothing. And once your mind stops believing you, rebuilding self-respect becomes a long, painful process. Discipline is the opposite. Every time you do something hard, you send a message to your brain: I do what needs to be done, not what I feel like doing. That single message rewires your identity. It builds a version of you that acts on command, not emotion. And that is the foundation of all leadership, the ability to lead yourself through resistance. Someone who has mastered discipline becomes dangerous, not in a negative way, but in a powerful way. They become immune to excuses. They become unfazed by stress. They become consistent regardless of mood. They become the type of person others trust, because people trust the predictable, the stable, the committed. Think about the people you admire. Most athletes, entrepreneurs, scholars, creators, thinkers. What makes them admirable is never just raw talent. Plenty of talented people go nowhere. What sets great individuals apart is their ability to wake up every day and do the work, to train, to study, to write, to improve, to repeat the process long after the excitement disappears. That is discipline, the quiet execution behind every great achievement. Discipline demands delayed gratification, the ability to sacrifice a short-term pleasure for a long-term reward. That's something most people avoid. They want the reward without the sacrifice, the progress without the repetition, the transformation without the struggle. But life doesn't work that way. You can't cheat the process. You can only cheat yourself out of results. When you practice discipline, you take control back from your impulses. You stop living by reaction and start living by design. You stop being a slave to emotions and become a servant of purpose. And when you do that, everything in your life changes: your confidence, your direction, your relationships, your finances, your goals. But let's make this clear. Discipline isn't about punishing yourself or living like a machine. It's about honoring the commitments you've made to yourself. It's about being consistent with what aligns with your values. It's about showing up for your future self, not abandoning them for quick, temporary comfort. Think of discipline as a quiet contract between you and the life you want. Every time you honor that contract, you get closer to the version of yourself you're trying to become. Every time you break it, you drift further away. The reason discipline matters so much in leadership is because people don't follow the loudest voice in the room, they follow the most consistent one. A leader without discipline is unstable, unpredictable, easily influenced, and quick to crumble under pressure. A disciplined leader, on the other hand, becomes a force of stability. They do what needs to be done, regardless of emotion or circumstance. They earn trust without asking for it. Discipline also builds credibility. When people see you commit and follow through, they respect you. When they see you sacrifice comfort for growth, they admire you. When they see you act according to a structure, not a mood, they perceive you as reliable. And reliability is the currency of leadership. Without discipline, your potential rots. With discipline, your potential compounds. But discipline is not something you magically develop through willpower alone. It has to be trained. It has to be practiced. It has to be reinforced through routines, habits, and structure. You need a clear direction. You need boundaries. You need a schedule. You need accountability. Without these, discipline becomes inconsistent at best and non-existent at worst. What makes discipline easier over time is repetition. The more you follow through, the more your brain trusts you. The more it trusts you, the more identity-based discipline takes over. You stop saying, "I should." You start saying, "This is who I am." That's when discipline stops being a struggle and becomes a lifestyle. Discipline is not about being perfect. You will slip, you will fall, you will have days where you fail to show up. But the key difference is that a disciplined person doesn't stay down. They correct quickly. They return to structure. They don't let one bad day turn into a bad week. They don't negotiate with excuses. Discipline is the strongest form of self-love and the purest form of self-leadership. It proves you care about your future more than your comfort. It proves you're willing to build a life, not just daydream about it. It proves you have the maturity to choose what matters over what is easy. If you want to lead anyone, a team, a family, a community, or even just your own life, discipline is the price of admission. Nothing else comes close. Without discipline, leadership collapses the moment pressure hits. With discipline, you become unshakable. Before you chase influence, titles, or status, build the discipline that makes those things meaningful. Discipline is the engine behind every result you want. It is the quiet force that transforms potential into power, and until you master it, you will always remain second in command in your own life. Chapter 3. Identity shapes every decision you make. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your identity. That's the part most people refuse to acknowledge. They set goals that sound impressive, convincing themselves that writing them down means they're becoming a new person. But nothing changes until the identity changes. You cannot behave like a new person while thinking like the old one. Identity is the internal script that runs your life. It decides what you attempt, what you avoid, what you tolerate, what you sabotage, and what you repeat. Most people try to force new habits while still holding on to old identities, and that never works. You can't build a strong life on a weak self-concept. The truth is, you act like the person you believe you are. If you see yourself as undisciplined, you will behave that way. If you see yourself as someone who always quits, you will quit again. If you see yourself as unlucky, you will interpret every challenge as proof. Your identity controls your filters, your meaning-making, your behavior, and ultimately, your results. Everyone wants change. Few people want the identity shift required to create it. Identity begins forming long before you ever consciously examine it. It's shaped by childhood messages, failures, disappointments, parental expectations, social environments, and the standards of the people around you. Over time, these influences turn into conclusions about who you think you are, and if you never challenge them, they become your life sentence. This is why so many adults walk around with stories that should have expired years ago. Someone once told them they weren't good enough. Someone laughed at their work. Someone criticized their abilities. Someone doubted their potential. And instead of rejecting that noise, they absorbed it as truth. You cannot lead yourself with clarity if your identity is built on outdated lies. Identity determines your thresholds. It sets the maximum you allow yourself to experience. If you secretly believe you're unworthy of success, you'll sabotage opportunities. If you believe you're meant to struggle, you'll cling to struggle even when better options appear. If you believe you can't change, you won't try long enough to prove yourself wrong. This is why people stay stuck even when they know exactly what to do. They're living from the wrong identity. The first step in leading yourself is breaking the identity that has been leading you. You must question it, challenge it, and dismantle it. You must zoom out and ask yourself, who taught me to think like this? Who convinced me I have limits I've never tested? What experiences made me shrink instead of grow? You cannot keep following an identity built in weakness and expect it to take you somewhere strong. But identity reconstruction is not philosophical, it's practical. It happens through behavior. You don't think your way into a new identity, you act your way into one. Identity shifts when you repeatedly behave in ways that contradict the old self. If you want to become disciplined, you show up consistently, not perfectly, until your brain begins to recognize consistency as part of who you are. If you want to become confident, you take small, courageous actions until fear is no longer your default. If you want to become reliable, you start honoring your commitments, even if it's just committing to drink water at the same time every day. Identity changes through evidence accumulated through action. This is why waiting to feel like a new person is useless. Identity does not change from emotion. Identity changes from execution. If you wait for inspiration, you'll stay stuck. If you act before you feel ready, you start building the proof your mind needs to believe something new. Every action reinforces a story, and the more you repeat an action, the stronger the story becomes. The old you is built from old stories. The new you must be built from new evidence. But this process requires honesty. You have to admit what identity you've actually been living from, not the identity you show others, not the identity you wish you had. The identity that drives your daily choices. Maybe your real identity is, I'm inconsistent. Maybe it's, I'm scared. Maybe it's, I don't trust myself. Good, at least now you know what you're rewriting. Leadership requires identity clarity. If you don't know who you are, you'll be influenced by anyone with a louder opinion. You'll chase approval instead of purpose. You'll bend your standards to avoid discomfort. You'll drift back into patterns you swear you're done with. That's what happens when identity is unstable. A strong identity creates strong decisions. A weak identity creates weak decisions. When you build a solid identity, your actions gain direction. You stop trying to impress people. You stop comparing yourself to others. You stop craving validation because your internal compass becomes stronger than outside opinions. Identity becomes leadership when you stop asking, "What do people expect from me?" and start asking, "What does the best version of me require from me?" That question alone can redirect an entire life. And understand this: identity is not something you wait for permission to change. No one has to believe in your transformation for it to be real. No one has to validate you for it to matter. People don't need to recognize your growth for it to happen. Identity shifts are internal first. External acceptance comes later when evidence becomes impossible to ignore. If you want to become someone worth following, you must first become someone you respect. If your identity isn't aligned with your standards, you will constantly feel like you're living below your potential. If your identity contradicts your purpose, you will always feel lost. This chapter isn't telling you who to become. It's telling you that you're allowed to choose. Identity is not destiny. Identity is direction. And you have control over that direction the moment you decide you're done being a follower to your old self. Leadership begins with identity, because identity determines everything that follows. Your habits, your decisions, your resilience, your discipline, your self-respect, your growth. When you reshape who you are at the core, your external world changes automatically. You cannot lead with clarity until you know who is doing the leading. Chapter 4. Emotional control creates stability. If you want to know why people don't trust you as a leader, here's the most brutal but accurate answer. Unstable emotions create unstable leadership. Nobody follows someone who acts like a ticking time bomb. Nobody follows someone who crumbles under pressure. Nobody follows someone whose reactions are unpredictable, inconsistent, or explosive. People don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be steady. Emotional control isn't about being cold, robotic, or detached from reality. It's about having authority over your inner world so the outer world doesn't destroy you. It's about being able to feel deeply without being controlled by those feelings. It's the difference between being reactive and being responsible. Most people think their emotions are the truth. They think, I feel it, so it must be real. But feelings are not facts. Feelings are responses, sometimes accurate, sometimes distorted, sometimes exaggerated by fear, insecurity, past trauma, ego, or stress. And if you treat every emotion like a command instead of a signal, you will constantly sabotage your own life. The strongest leaders don't eliminate emotion. They regulate emotion. Let's break this down with complete clarity. When something challenges you, criticism, failure, rejection, a setback, a surprise, an insult, your emotional system fires first. That's biology. But what happens next determines whether you lead or collapse. Most people lash out, withdraw, panic, overthink, or spiral. They assume the emotion is the whole story. But leaders don't react instantly. Leaders pause. Leaders interpret. Leaders choose a response. That pause is everything. It's the difference between reacting out of fear and responding with clarity. The moment you pause, you unlock the ability to make a decision instead of a mess. Emotional control is not about suppressing your feelings. Suppression only makes emotions stronger and more dangerous. Control is about understanding the feeling, naming it, and then deciding whether it deserves power. Think of your emotions like waves. They rise, they fall, they move. You can either drown in them or learn to surf them. If you learn to surf to ride them without being consumed, you become unshakable. If you drown, your emotions will run your entire life and ruin your leadership. Now let's be blunt. No one respects an emotionally reactive person. If you explode when challenged, you look weak, not strong. If you break down at every inconvenience, you look unstable, not vulnerable. If your mood shifts unpredictably, people walk on eggshells around you, not out of respect, but fear. And fear does not build trust. Fear destroys relationships, credibility, and influence. On the other hand, when you develop emotional control, people gravitate toward you. They feel safe around you. They feel grounded in your presence. They feel like you're someone who can handle life without falling apart. That alone makes you a natural leader. Here's what people don't understand. Emotional control is not natural. No one is born with it. It is trained through discomfort, struggle, reflection, and repetition. You learn emotional control the same way you learn strength through tension and resistance. When you experience stress and choose to breathe instead of panic, you build emotional muscle. When you receive criticism and choose to evaluate instead of defend, you build emotional maturity. When you feel anger and choose patience, you build authority over your impulses. When you feel fear and choose action anyway, you build courage. You cannot build emotional control in comfort. It's built in pressure. But emotional control does not just protect you, it also sharpens you. When your emotions don't hijack your mind, you think clearer. You see the truth instead of the distortion. You make better decisions. You respond based on strategy, not insecurity. You choose long-term benefit over short-term relief. This makes you more powerful than the majority of people who let their emotions drive their lives like a drunk driver behind the wheel. A leader must be the calmest person in the room, not because they feel calm, but because they choose calm. Calm is not a mood. Calm is a skill. And here's another truth people run from. Emotional control gives you respect in a way loudness never will. A person who cannot control their emotions always feels the need to prove themselves. A person who controls their emotions never does. Their presence becomes the proof. Let's address something even deeper. Many people hide behind the excuse, "That's just how I am," to justify their emotional instability. But that line is simply a shield for avoidance. Emotional outbursts are not personality traits. They are untrained patterns. And untrained patterns can be retrained. If you cling to old patterns, you're not protecting your identity, you're protecting your weaknesses. Leadership demands that you stop hiding behind excuses and start mastering what once controlled you. Now, emotional control doesn't mean you never express how you feel. It means you express emotions with intention, not explosion. It means you communicate instead of attack. It means you articulate instead of erupt. It means you address issues with clarity instead of transferring your emotional chaos onto others. People trust leaders who can communicate their feelings without being consumed by them. But let's get brutally honest. Emotional control is hard because it forces you to confront parts of yourself you've avoided for years. Your triggers, your insecurities, your fears, your anger, your emotional numbness, your childhood wounds. These things don't disappear because you ignore them. They control you precisely because you ignore them. Mastering emotional control means facing all of it. A leader doesn't run from their triggers. They study them, they understand them, they outgrow them, and they refuse to give those triggers the power to dictate their behavior. This is what creates emotional authority, and emotional authority creates leadership. Once you develop emotional stability, something transformative happens. Your presence alone becomes influence. You enter a room, and people feel steadier. They speak differently. They behave differently. Not because you forced anything, but because stability is contagious. Emotional chaos is contagious too, but only one of them builds leadership. Emotional control is the difference between a person others tolerate and a person others trust. It's the difference between temporary influence and lasting impact. It's the difference between reacting like a follower and responding like a leader. If you cannot manage the storms within you, you will never be able to lead others through theirs. Leadership begins with emotional authority, and emotional authority begins with responsibility, not blame, not excuses. Responsibility. When you take responsibility for your emotional reactions, you take control of your life. You become the anchor in a world full of people who drift. Emotional control is not optional, it is essential. Without it, leadership collapses the moment pressure rises. With it, you become a force people can rely on and follow. Chapter 5. Your standards build or break your future. If you want a brutally honest summary of your life so far, here it is. Everything you currently have, your habits, your relationships, your finances, your health, your discipline, your confidence is a reflection of the standards you've accepted. Not the standards you say you have, the standards you actually live by. People love to talk about high standards, but they live inside low ones. They talk about wanting success while tolerating laziness. They talk about wanting love while accepting disrespect. They talk about wanting discipline while letting excuses run their lives. The gap between their words and their actions is the exact distance between the life they want and the life they have. Your standards determine what you tolerate. What you tolerate becomes your behavior. Your behavior becomes your identity. And your identity becomes your future. Most people don't realize how destructive their low standards are because they don't collapse in one moment. They erode slowly. You don't lose your potential overnight. You lose it through small compromises that eventually become a lifestyle. You tell yourself, missing one day is fine, and soon missing one day becomes missing 10. You tolerate someone's disrespect once, and soon disrespect becomes normal. You break one promise to yourself, and soon you stop taking your own promises seriously altogether. Low standards don't show up loudly. They creep in quietly. People think their life is shaped by big decisions. It's not. It's shaped by the small standards you reinforce every single day. Wake up late once? Not a big deal. Wake up late every day for 6 months? That's a different story. Procrastinate once? Harmless. Procrastinate every day? Now you've built a habit that tears your life apart from the inside. A leader's life changes the moment they stop accepting the bare minimum from themselves. Raising your standards doesn't mean becoming strict to impress others. It means refusing to betray your own potential. It means creating rules for your life and enforcing them, especially when they're inconvenient. It means expecting excellence from yourself, even when no one else does. It means having self-respect strong enough to say, I don't accept this from myself anymore. Here's a harsh truth. Your standards determine your self-respect. You can't claim high self-respect while tolerating low-level behavior from yourself. You can't claim to value your future while engaging in habits that destroy it. Self-respect isn't a feeling, it's a behavior. It's built when you hold yourself to a level most people would collapse under. Look at your life. Seriously look at it. The quality of it is a mirror reflecting what you've allowed. If your finances are a mess, you've been tolerating financial carelessness. If your health is declining, you've been tolerating neglect. If your relationships are draining, you've been tolerating disrespect. If your motivation is inconsistent, you've been tolerating excuses. Leaders don't tolerate what weakens them. Followers do. And you need to decide which one you are. People think raising standards means making the right decision once. That is wrong. Anyone can make a good decision once. Raising standards means refusing to drop them when pressure rises. It means being the same person with the same principles, whether you feel motivated or exhausted, whether people applaud you or ignore you, whether life is smooth or difficult. Leaders with high standards don't fluctuate with circumstances. Their standards remain the same regardless of mood or environment. That stability is what creates growth. But here's the part most people avoid. Raising standards always demands sacrifice. You have to let go of the habits, mindsets, environments, and sometimes the people who pull you backward. You cannot keep low-standard behaviors and expect a high-standard life. Something has to give. If you maintain low standards in one area, it eventually infects everything else. You can't be disciplined at work, but undisciplined in your personal life, and expect long-term stability. You can't have high standards in your relationships, but low standards in your health, and expect deep confidence. Standards are connected. Weakness in one area eventually spreads into others. Raising your standards forces you to confront the version of yourself that settles, the version that says, "This is good enough," the version that avoids effort, the version that rationalizes bad habits. You must kill that version mentally. You must bury it and then build a new version that refuses to tolerate anything that contradicts your goals. Your standards should scare your old self. They should challenge your comfort zone. They should force growth that feels uncomfortable at first. If your standards don't make you grow, they are not high, they are convenient. The moment you raise your standards, something powerful happens. Your environment adjusts. People who are used to your old standards either rise with you or fall away. Habits that once felt normal start feeling beneath you. Opportunities that once seemed impossible start becoming accessible. Confidence begins to rise naturally because you're finally living in alignment with the person you want to become. Leaders don't set goals to inspire themselves. They set standards to transform themselves. Goals motivate, standards define. Goals give direction, standards enforce direction. Goals tell you what you want. Standards tell you what you will not accept. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming they need more motivation. They don't. They need higher standards. Motivation fades. Standards endure. Motivation depends on mood. Standards depend on identity. Motivation is emotional. Standards are structural. When your standards rise, everything else rises with them. Your habits sharpen, your confidence strengthens, your self-respect increases, your environment improves, your results compound. People start observing you differently, not because you're louder, but because you've become stronger. Low standards make life easier in the moment, but harder in the long run. High standards make life harder in the moment, but dramatically easier in the long run. You choose which hardship you want. No leader is built on weak standards. No person becomes exceptional through comfort. No future changes unless the standards change first. Raise the way you think. Raise the way you act. Raise what you tolerate. Raise what you expect from yourself. Because everything you want depends on becoming someone who refuses to settle for anything beneath their potential. Your standards will either build your life or break it. Chapter 6. Integrity is the foundation of influence. Integrity is not a personality trait. It's not a moral decoration you wear to look good. It's the backbone of your entire character. Without integrity, everything else in your life collapses: your credibility, your influence, your relationships, your self-respect, your leadership. Integrity is the one thing you cannot fake for long, because time exposes every inconsistency and every lie. People think integrity means being a good person. That's childish. Integrity means alignment. Alignment between your values and your actions, your promises and your follow-through, your words and your behavior. When those things don't match, you become fragmented, weak, and unreliable. You become someone no one can trust, including yourself. Let me put this bluntly. You cannot lead anyone if you can't even trust yourself. Most people's biggest problem isn't the world around them. It's the internal war between who they claim to be and who they actually are. They talk about discipline while living undisciplined. They talk about honesty while lying to themselves. They talk about standards while dropping them the moment they become inconvenient. This inner contradiction destroys their confidence long before the outside world ever sees it. Integrity is self-respect in action. When your actions match your words, you trust yourself. When you trust yourself, you don't hesitate, overthink, or break under pressure. You become grounded. You become believable. You become someone whose presence carries weight. That is what people follow: not talent, not charm, not intelligence, but consistency of character. Integrity is not about being flawless. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone slips. Everyone falls short. Integrity is about owning your failures instead of hiding behind excuses. People don't expect perfection from a leader, but they expect honesty. When you make a mistake and take full responsibility without deflecting or blaming, your integrity strengthens instead of weakens. But when you hide it, deny it, or shift the blame, your reputation erodes piece by piece. Here's a truth most people don't want to admit. Every time you lie to others, you weaken your external credibility. But every time you lie to yourself, you destroy your internal credibility, and that's 10 times more damaging. You cannot build a confident life on a foundation of self-deception. You cannot grow when you refuse to face the truth. Integrity is the willingness to confront the facts, even when they hurt. Let's break this down deeper. Every promise you make to yourself is a contract. When you keep the contract, your mind learns to trust you. When you break it, your mind learns that your words are empty. And when your own brain doesn't believe you, you lose the psychological force needed to lead, act, or change anything. That is why people feel stuck. Their mouth says yes, but their actions say no. Their intentions say, "I want better," but their habits say, "I'm fine staying the same." The gap between intention and action is where momentum dies, and integrity is the bridge. Here's what most people forget. Integrity is tested when it's inconvenient, not when it's easy. Anyone can be honest when honesty costs nothing. Anyone can show up when they're excited. Anyone can keep promises when conditions are perfect. Integrity is built when you do the right thing, especially when it's hard. When it's easier to lie than admit a mistake. When it's easier to stay silent than speak the truth. When it's easier to quit than stay committed. When it's easier to break a promise than honor it. Those moments define you. Those moments reveal who you really are, not the image you want to project, but the identity you actually possess. People are watching your consistency far more closely than your words. They watch how you act under pressure. They watch how you treat people who can't offer you anything. They watch how you behave when something goes wrong. They watch whether you live the values you claim to stand for. And whether you like it or not, they judge you with brutal accuracy. A person with integrity becomes predictable in the best way. People know what to expect from you. They know you won't manipulate them. They know you won't betray them. They know your word holds weight. And that reliability is what makes people follow you. Trust is the real currency of influence, and integrity is the currency of trust. Without integrity, you're just noise. With integrity, you're a signal. But integrity isn't only about interactions with others. It's also about the standards you uphold alone. What you do when no one is watching reveals more about your character than anything you do publicly. If your public life and private life don't match, you're not a leader, you're an actor. And acting is exhausting because eventually the mask cracks. Integrity frees you from the burden of pretending. When you live in alignment, you don't need to remember what you said, who you pretended to be, or which lies you used to maintain an image. You simply live the truth, and the truth is easy to maintain because it doesn't require performance. Here's the hardest truth in this chapter. Integrity demands sacrifice. It requires you to say no when you want to say yes. It requires you to walk away from situations, relationships, and opportunities that violate your principles. It requires you to confront uncomfortable truths rather than hide behind convenient ones. Most people avoid this because they want comfort more than character. But you cannot have integrity and convenience at the same time. One will destroy the other. Integrity also forces you to stop blaming others for your results. Leaders don't outsource responsibility. They don't blame the system, the circumstances, the people around them. They look inward first. They ask, how did I contribute to this? What role did I play? What do I need to fix in myself? That level of accountability is rare, and rare is respected. When you take full responsibility for your actions, your life becomes yours again. You stop feeling like a victim and start acting like a creator. That shift alone separates leaders from followers. And here's the payoff. When you build your life on integrity, every part of your character strengthens. Your confidence increases because you trust yourself. Your relationships improve because people trust you. Your influence grows because your actions match your values. Your decisions become cleaner because you no longer negotiate with your own dishonesty. Integrity is not about looking good, it's about being solid. If you want influence, earn credibility. If you want credibility, practice consistency. And if you want consistency, build integrity. There is no shortcut. There is no hack. There is only alignment. Leadership without integrity collapses the moment pressure hits. Leadership with integrity becomes unstoppable because nothing is more powerful than a person whose actions are rooted in truth. Chapter 7. Becoming someone worth following. If you strip leadership down to its purest form, it comes down to one brutal truth. People follow strength, not power, not loudness, not status. Strength. And strength doesn't mean aggression or dominance. It means internal solidity. It means a person who knows who they are, obeys their own principles, and refuses to collapse under pressure. You cannot lead anyone until you become someone you would willingly follow. That means you need to ask yourself a hard question. If another person lived your exact habits, your exact routines, your exact emotional reactions, your exact level of discipline, your exact integrity, would you trust them as a leader? Most people wouldn't, not because they're bad people, but because they've spent years acting in ways that weaken their own authority. They've spent years tolerating mediocrity, inconsistency, procrastination, emotional instability, and weak standards. They want others to see them as leaders while living like followers. Becoming someone worth following is not about impressing people. It's about transforming yourself into someone who sets the tone instead of absorbing the environment. It's about building a life so aligned, so disciplined, so intentional that leadership comes naturally, not forcefully. Leadership is not given to you. Leadership is recognized in you. People don't crown you a leader. They gravitate toward you because something in you stands out. Your discipline, your focus, your self-respect, your emotional steadiness, your ability to make decisions without fear or approval seeking. When you lead yourself, you show people what's possible. You become the proof, and people trust proof over promises every time. Let's break down what it actually means to become someone worth following. First, you must stop living life on autopilot. Most people wake up, look at their phone, get consumed by distraction, and spend the rest of the day reacting instead of creating. That is follower behavior. Leaders don't live in reaction. Leaders live in direction. Leaders don't wake up and ask, "What do I feel like today?" Leaders wake up and ask, "What needs to be done?" They don't let moods dictate their mission. The version of you who leads your life must be intentional, not emotional. Second, you must eliminate internal contradictions. Nothing destroys followability more than hypocrisy. If you talk about discipline but don't practice it, people feel it. If you talk about standards but drop them whenever they're inconvenient, people see it. If you talk about honesty but operate on excuses, people sense it. You cannot expect others to follow a standard you don't follow yourself. Influence is built when your actions match your message, when your consistency matches your ambition, when your character matches your claims. Third, becoming someone worth following requires emotional steadiness. The world is chaotic. People are stressed, overwhelmed, anxious, and uncertain. They're drowning in information and directionless in purpose. In environments like that, people instinctively move toward the calmest, clearest, most grounded person. That person becomes the anchor. Your steadiness becomes their security. Your clarity becomes their direction. Your discipline becomes their inspiration. And the shift is effortless. People follow naturally because your presence stabilizes their chaos. Fourth, you must build credibility through repetition, not through hype, not through speeches, through consistent action. Reliability is a superpower in a world full of inconsistency. When people know you will show up, when people know you follow through, when people know you don't disappear the moment things get hard, that's when you gain real trust. Trust is leadership. There's no leadership without trust. And trust is not built through talent, it's built through repetition. Fifth, becoming someone worth following requires sacrificing the version of yourself that everyone else outgrew except you, the immature self, the undisciplined self, the comfort-driven self, the easily triggered self, the self that wants results without responsibility. That version of you cannot lead. It can only follow. You cannot build a future by protecting the past. You cannot become exceptional while living unchanged. You cannot lead with old habits, old excuses, old weaknesses, and old identities. Leadership requires evolution, and evolution requires death, the death of who you used to be. Finally, to truly become someone worth following, you must live in alignment with a bigger vision. People don't follow small energy. They follow someone who is going somewhere. They follow someone who has direction, purpose, clarity, and momentum. You don't need all the answers. You don't need perfection. You don't need a flawless path. You only need a vision strong enough to guide you forward consistently. When you move with conviction, you give people something rare: hope. Not blind hope, but grounded hope. The kind that comes from watching someone who isn't waiting for life to change, but choosing to change it. Leadership is not about telling people what to do. It's about becoming the type of person who shows them what's possible. And here's the truth: when you lead yourself with discipline, integrity, emotional control, high standards, and a strong identity, people will follow automatically. Not because you ask, not because you demand, but because your life emits a frequency most people wish they had within themselves. Your strength becomes magnetic. Your clarity becomes attractive. Your consistency becomes respected. You don't chase influence, you attract it. In the end, becoming someone worth following is not about becoming impressive, it's about becoming solid. Someone whose life has structure, purpose, and alignment. Someone who people trust, not because of your words, but because of your behavior. Someone who leads themselves with enough discipline and dignity that followership becomes the natural byproduct. You don't ask people to follow. You give them a reason to. That is the completion of leadership. That is the final evolution of self-governance. That is who you must become, not for others, but for yourself. Because becoming someone worth following doesn't just lead others. It saves your own life from becoming mediocre. Chapter 8. Consistency turns leadership into legacy. If the earlier chapters taught you how to build yourself, this chapter teaches you how to maintain yourself. Because here's the truth. Anyone can be disciplined for a week. Anyone can set high standards for a month. Anyone can hold integrity until it becomes inconvenient. Anyone can control their emotions when life is peaceful. Anyone can lead themselves for a short burst of time. But almost no one can sustain it. And that's why almost no one becomes a leader worth remembering. Consistency is the force that turns potential into reality. Consistency is the bridge between short-term effort and long-term transformation. Consistency is the difference between temporary progress and permanent change. Leadership that cannot sustain itself becomes irrelevant. Leadership that sustains itself becomes legacy. Legacy isn't about fame or recognition. Legacy is the long-term impact of how you lived. It's the invisible imprint you leave on every life you touch, directly or indirectly. And whether you like it or not, you're already leaving a legacy. The question is whether it's one of strength or one of inconsistency. Consistency is what determines the answer. Let's be brutally honest here. Most people don't fail because they're incapable. They fail because they're inconsistent. They start strong, then fade. They commit passionately, then collapse as soon as excitement fades. They make promises in moments of motivation and break them in moments of discomfort. This is the pattern of someone who leads themselves only when it feels easy. That is not leadership, that is convenience. Anyone can act disciplined when life gives them no resistance. A leader acts disciplined precisely when life does. Consistency is not intensity. Consistency is repetition. The hard truth is that greatness is built from boring repetitions, the kind no one praises you for. You become strong by doing the same foundational actions every day. You become trustworthy by honoring your commitments every day. You sharpen your character by showing up every day. The world glamorizes the peak moments, breakthroughs, achievements, milestones. But what created those moments was consistent execution when no one cared. A leader does not rise in big moments. A leader rises because of the small moments, repeated endlessly. Consistency creates a predictable internal system. Without it, your life becomes emotional chaos. Motivated one day, exhausted the next. Inspired one hour, defeated the next. Confident one moment, insecure the next. You cannot build anything stable on an unstable foundation. Consistency is what stabilizes your character, your habits, your identity, and your future. People follow consistency because consistency symbolizes reliability. In an unpredictable world, reliability is rare, and rare becomes valuable. But here's the truth that hurts. Consistency will require you to do things you don't feel like doing. Frequently, daily, sometimes hourly. If you only act when you feel ready, you will never build internal power. You will live under the dictatorship of your moods. Successful people do not rely on their feelings, they rely on their systems. Consistency is built from systems, not emotion. When you build systems, routines, habits, schedules, priorities, your mind gains structure. That structure removes ambiguity, and ambiguity is the enemy of discipline. Without structure, you negotiate with yourself. With structure, you act. And action, repeated, becomes consistency. People fail because they rely on self-control in situations where systems should exist. They hope motivation will keep them consistent. It won't. Motivation is unstable. Systems are stable. A system is simply a decision you make once that continues to benefit you forever. But consistency requires something deeper than systems. It requires identity, alignment. You must see yourself as the kind of person who follows through, as the kind of person who finishes what they start, as the kind of person who is reliable, disciplined, and unshakable. Once that identity becomes real, inconsistency feels foreign. If your identity is weak, your consistency will always collapse. But let me be even more direct. Consistency requires courage. It requires you to keep acting even when you doubt yourself, even when no one supports you, even when the progress feels slow, even when results take longer than expected, even when the path becomes lonely. The majority of people quit because consistency demands a kind of patience and resilience they've never trained. They want speed, not depth. They want quick results, not lasting mastery. They want shortcuts, not character development. But leadership is not built on shortcuts. Leadership is built through endurance. Consistency is also proof of seriousness. When you show up over and over, without needing incentives or applause, the world starts taking you seriously. People watch your habits long before they listen to your words. They look for long-term behavior before trusting your direction. This is why inconsistency destroys influence. It signals instability, unreliability, and immaturity. A leader who cannot remain consistent becomes a leader who cannot be followed. But let's flip to the positive side, because there is power here. When you learn to stay consistent long enough, something extraordinary happens: momentum. Momentum is the silent force that makes hard tasks easier, good habits automatic, discipline effortless. Once momentum is built, your life starts moving forward, even when you're not exerting maximum effort. Momentum is the reward for consistency. Consistency is the price for momentum. And once momentum takes over, leadership becomes natural. You don't have to force discipline, you are disciplined. You don't have to force standards, your standards enforce themselves. You don't have to force respect, people recognize your consistency and give it to you. Once you become consistent, influence follows you without you needing to chase it. The last and most important truth of this chapter is this: becoming someone worth following is not a moment, it's a lifestyle. It's not achieved in a single breakthrough. It's built one consistent decision at a time, and every decision strengthens or weakens your legacy. Inconsistency weakens your leadership. Consistency immortalizes it. If you want to build a life that lasts, if you want to build character that stands firm through storms, if you want to build influence that people feel instead of question, consistency is the final piece that locks everything into place. You don't need perfection. You need repetition. You need commitment. You need endurance. Because the world follows the person who shows up, not once, not occasionally, but relentlessly. Consistency turns leadership into legacy. Consistency turns potential into results. Consistency turns your name into something people trust. And the moment you commit to consistency, you stop leading temporarily and start leading permanently. If you've made it this far, you already know this audiobook was never about motivating you. It was about confronting you. It was about stripping away the illusions you've been hiding behind, the excuses, the old identities, the emotional impulsiveness, the low standards, the lack of integrity, the inconsistency, and forcing you to face the truth that has been waiting for you your entire life. No one is coming to save you. No one is coming to lead you. No one is coming to build your discipline, your confidence, your stability, your future. That responsibility is yours and yours alone. The world is full of people waiting for direction, waiting for clarity, waiting for permission. They wait for someone else to lead, so they don't have to carry the weight of their own potential. But that path leads nowhere. Followers wait, leaders move, and the first place they move is inward. This audiobook has shown you the internal architecture of leadership, not the surface-level techniques, but the deep foundations. You learned that leadership starts with self-authority, not external influence. That discipline is not motivation, it's self-governance. That identity is not fixed, it's self-created. That emotional control isn't coldness, it's self-mastery. That standards are not preferences, they're boundaries that build your future. That integrity isn't about image, it's about alignment. That becoming someone worth following isn't a moment, it's a lifestyle of consistency. None of those principles work unless you turn them into behavior. Knowledge means nothing without execution. Awareness means nothing without discipline. Desire means nothing without follow-through. The world is full of people who know what to do, but never become anything because they refuse to embody what they know. You cannot become a leader in your mind while living like a follower in your actions. The truth is harsh, but liberating. Your life doesn't change when you understand these principles. Your life changes when you live them. When you wake up early, even when your body wants comfort. When you keep your word, even when your mood shifts. When you refuse to tolerate anything that weakens you. When you control your emotions instead of letting them control you. When you show up consistently, even when the results are slow. When you choose the identity of who you want to become, not the identity shaped by your past. This is where leadership becomes freedom. Because when you lead yourself, You no longer need the world to validate you. You don't need applause. You don't need permission. You don't need someone to push you. You don't need circumstances to align perfectly. Your strength comes from within. Your direction comes from within. Your standards come from within. Your purpose comes from within. And nothing in the outside world can take that away. The greatest leaders in history weren't defined by followers. They were defined by discipline. They were defined by consistency. They were defined by their ability to direct themselves long before the world ever recognized them. Leadership is not a spotlight, it's a responsibility. And the first responsibility is to yourself. You cannot lead a family until you lead yourself. You cannot lead a team until you lead yourself. You cannot lead a community until you lead yourself. You cannot lead a generation until you lead yourself. Every external influence you hope to have begins with internal authority. And that authority is earned through daily decisions, small, unglamorous, repetitive decisions that slowly transform you into a person capable of carrying weight without breaking. A person who doesn't crumble under pressure. A person who stays grounded in chaos. A person who acts with integrity even when no one is looking. A person who does not negotiate with weakness. A person who does not retreat into comfort when the mission becomes demanding. A leader is not built in public. A leader is built in the dark, in the quiet, private hours, where no one claps, no one watches, no one praises you for doing the right thing. That's where your character is forged. That's where your discipline sharpens. That's where your emotional control strengthens. That's where your standards harden. That's where your identity evolves. That's where your life changes. And when you emerge from those private battles with clarity, strength, and consistency, people won't follow you because you ask them to. They'll follow you because they can feel the difference. They'll sense the weight of your self-leadership. They'll recognize the discipline behind your actions. They'll trust the integrity in your voice. They'll respect the stability in your presence. They'll be inspired not by your words, but by your example. That is the highest form of leadership, not influence, but impact. Not authority, but alignment. Not demand, but demonstration. The closing message of this audiobook is simple but uncompromising. Lead yourself relentlessly, unapologetically, consistently. Do the hard things without waiting for applause. Raise your standards and refuse to lower them for anyone. Act with integrity even when it's inconvenient. Strengthen your emotions instead of drowning in them. Choose the identity that matches your potential, not your past. And show up every single day, not because it's easy, but because it's required. If you do this, you won't need to chase leadership. Leadership will find you. People will follow you. Your life will transform. Your legacy will form itself. Because the world always follows someone who can lead themselves first. This is the responsibility. This is the path. This is the calling. Now, the question is simple. Will you lead or will you wait? The answer determines the rest of your life.